Hello again. Um, Today I'm doing another Pathfinder video. Last one I did was covering the fighter and like how to fill out the character sheet. Um, since I just did that one, I think it's fair to cover weapons real quick. Alright, so weapons, you can categorize them two different ways, really. Alright, so first off you have light weapons, one-handed weapons, and two-handed weapons. There's also ranged. Ranged will also fall into range one hand, range two hand, such as a bow and arrow takes two hands to use, a javelin only takes one. But anyway, the light weapons are going to be things like a dagger, like cestus, sickle. These are going to be your smaller things. They're very light, very easy to use. One-handed weapons, you're going to be branching into more of like a long sword, maybe a little battle axe, warhammer, even things like a scimitar, trident. Then you have your two-handed, like a great sword or earthbreaker, halberd. The big distinguishing thing between these three categories is mostly going to fall into either weapon styles, like dual wielding. Dual wielding, a lot of people are going to tell you that it's not the best to do, and there are a lot of things that are drawbacks from it. When you're dual wielding, your offhand weapon does less damage, but you also take a negative to hit with both your weapons. But the reason why the light weapons category is best for dual wielding is you only take a -2 when you're attacking with both of them. If you're wielding two one-handed weapons, the negative goes up exponentially. I believe it is -4, -4. I can actually look this up real quick using Masterwork Tools. Two weapon fighting. If I can find it on here. Alright. So when you're two weapon fighting. No, that's not the chart that I'm looking for. Alright, so when offhand weapons light in your two weapon fighting, it's a -2, -2. Now if you're just doing two weapon fighting, it's a -4, -4. Now this is all with the feet, by the way. If you don't have the feet, the normal penalties is -6 and -10. In no way do you want to take those negatives. And if your offhand weapons light, -4, -8, once again, never dual wield without two weapon fighting. So, we'll be going to the next categories. Because as I said, there's light weapons, one-handed weapons, two-handed weapons. There's also another way to distinguish weapons. Simple, martial, and exotic. Simple weapons, most classes can use every simple weapon. There are very few that can only use a handful of them. Martial weapons, on the other hand, most time you're either going to have to be a martial class to get access to the majority of them. However, some classes will get a handful of these weapons tied into their proficiencies, such as a druid, proficient with a scimitar. Same thing with like clerics, they're proficient with the weapon of their deity. But then you hit exotic weapons. These weapons are a lot harder to come by with base proficiencies. Monks are proficient with some exotic weapons as they are monk weapons. Some of the expanded classes, such as the ninja and the samurai, are proficient with more of them. Overall, though, exotic weapons are better than your martial and simple counterparts, but only by a small amount. Typically, if you want to grab one of these, you're going to have to use a feat to gain proficiency. However, once again, like, it's hard to outweigh it. Like, is it actually better? One weapon that I always look at to kind of give an example to this would be the bastard sword. The bastard sword and the long sword are essentially the same weapon, with the only difference being the bastard sword does more damage, but not by much. So I'll type in bastard sword on this. If I'm correct, it does 1d10. Yep. So, a longsword does 1d8, a bastard sword does 1d10. Now, when you look at that, burning a feat to gain that weapon, whereas you could have taken another feat, such as, let's say you're a fighter, take weapon specialization longsword, you get +2 damage. Whereas instead of taking weapons or exotic weapon proficiency, bastard sword. But there are some builds where using an exotic weapon can be beneficial. But once again, when you're specialized in a weapon, you gotta think about how common is this going to be in this campaign. Is the DM going to allow me to get them? If not, will the DM allow me to craft them? Because that's going to be one of the biggest things about weapons. Crafting them takes a long time. I believe it takes a full week to craft a masterwork weapon. Now, with that amount of time, you gotta think, is your campaign going to give you enough time to do it? Are you going to come across a blacksmith that might be able to make it for you? When you're looking into all these different things, selecting the right weapon for you is going to be a little bit more difficult. So like I said, always talk to your DM before you start a game. Talk to them about what weapons are going to be available. Should you specialize? You know, try to ask for some advice. Because for me, in most of my games, I will allow you to find a blacksmith or a tradesman who will be able to make it for you. Now, granted, it is going to still take time. And if the blacksmith has never made one before, like let's say you want a katana and you're talking to a standard dwarf and he's never made one before, I might add on some additional time to make it. But other campaigns from other DMs I've had, all the blacksmiths are usually busy. They will, what's in their shop, so what's in their shop. On top of that, if you want magic items, you're going to have to kill monsters. Hopefully one of them has one, but then you're rolling the dice. You bust into a goblin's lair and maybe they have a magical horse chopper. You're using a longsword. Why would you switch from one to the other? But this is like the biggest part of specializing in a specific weapon, is you have to kind of ask about your campaign first. I've had exotic weapon campaigns where I'd use like a bastard sword or a katana or some of the other weapons such as chain kama, etc. And then the weapon just never pops up. You burn all these feats into one weapon and you never get to use them. In general, a lot of games, people will tell you not to specialize in something unless it's something that's extremely common. Like, for instance, if you're playing a ranged character using a longbow, you can pump your feats into that longbow. Because there's only really two choices, longbow and shortbow, for the most part. And because of that, they're going to be extremely common. But anyway, going back to it, so yeah, you have your light, one-handed, and two-handed, and then you have your simple, your martial, and your exotic. Always look at your character, see what they're proficient with before you choose a weapon, and always talk to your DM. Make sure that the weapons are going to be available if you want to do a certain build, because the general DM will tell you yay or nay. If you say, how common is the bastard sword going to be in your campaign, he says, not very, you probably shouldn't grab a bastard sword. But without further ado, I'm going to say that's a pretty good general covering of weapons. Of course, always look them up on your own time. They can be found on the websites or in most apps. There's some pretty cool ones out there, but keep in mind that a lot of weapons are out there for flavor over can't think of the word at the moment, but style over function, I should say. In general, always look for something that has 19 to 20 or 18 to 20 crit, as the more often you crit, the more often you can deal tons of damage. But anyway, always consult your websites, your DM, and of course the books or apps if you have them. But thank you for your time.